The combination of the words chiropractic and ecology isn't something you see often, and I'm sure a lot of people who come across this video are going to be wondering how they're related. My name is Dr. Peter Fox. I'm a chiropractor, and I hope to provide as deep an answer to that question as possible in a short video. So I'll start by saying that when the founder of chiropractic, D.D. Palmer, defined chiropractic in his last book, he started out with a discussion on a science that was called bionomics at the time, but became known as ecology over the next 100 years or so. This video will cover a range of topics, but starts out with some really basic concepts and builds on them in a way that's easy to follow, and shows how integral these two disciplines really are. But more importantly, this video tells the story of why this pioneering ecological perspective on health and chiropractic is so critical to enhancing personal well-being and evolving the practice of chiropractic into the future. That life exists at all is miraculous. We emerge from a sea of universal chaos, order from disorder. In the absence of an intentional investment of time and effort, the structures humans build will decay over time. This happened to Rome, this happened to Egypt, and it's happening right now to the streets in Michigan where I'm putting this video together. This tendency towards chaos and disorder is known scientifically as entropy. Another descriptive term for it is the arrow of time, and there's a basic law of physics that emerges from it. The second law of thermodynamics, which states that systems increase in entropy, or chaos, over time. Think of it like the Humpty Dumpty story in the language of science. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Basically, you can't uncrack an egg. But there are special exceptions to the second law of thermodynamics. Over time, a gradual descent into chaos is the rule, yet somehow there are scenarios where the arrow of time is reversed and order emerges from chaos. The question of how things in general, but life in particular, are able to contradict this tendency towards chaos have been asked by some of the world's greatest minds, and they've been able to come up with very good answers. Schrödinger, one of the early developers of quantum theory, came up with a particularly good one that involves the transformation of the sun's energy into radiant heat, something that turns out to be extremely useful for the sciences of both chiropractic and ecology. Energy from solar bodies is a source for all life on planet Earth. Plants convert the energy of the sun into sugars, carbohydrates, and proteins. Animals eat that stored solar energy, then other animals eat those animals, and so on up the food chain. But there are other sources of energy too, energy from volcanic vents at the bottom of the sea, for example. I bring this up to remind you that our solar system formed from the disintegration of other, older solar systems. The general flow is order to chaos, and eventually our solar system will collapse and form other organized systems elsewhere. So how is it that a big bang at the origin of the universe, or a supernova, or any other chaotic event can lead to the creation of something new somewhere else? The answer is a matter of transforming energy by moving it through organized material structures that require energy to maintain themselves. The second law of thermodynamics states that over time, closed systems move towards higher levels of chaos or entropy. Planet Earth has characteristics of both closed and open systems. It's mostly a closed system as far as how much matters here, but it's open in terms of its energy flows. So the amount of minerals and other compounds that make up the physical things here is pretty much constant. They just rearrange themselves in different configurations over time, but the energy here is in a constant state of flux. We get most of our energy from the sun. Some of it's reflected back into space, some of it heats things up, but some of it's used to organize matter into living systems by exploiting an exception to the second law of thermodynamics. Think of how sunlight changes when you view it through a prism. The prism divides the visible white light into its individual components that we see as a rainbow. The white light coming from the sun is highly organized, which means that it has a great deal of energy and potential to perform biological work. When light is absorbed by living things, we metabolize it and radiate it out as heat or infrared light. Think about a campfire. When the coals are glowing yellow, they're at their hottest, and they have a great deal of energy inside of them. As the fire transforms the energy stored in the wood, less and less energy becomes available. The brightness of the coal dims from yellow to orange to red, and finally the coal becomes black. But for a time, that black coal's still hot. It's still radiating energy, but it's in the infrared spectrum, not the visible spectrum. So you can feel that energy present in the coal, but you can't see it. Living cells are basically full of tiny little campfires that burn like little black coals. You can't see the light coming from them, but you can feel their warmth. If you hug someone, they're warm. If you pet a dog, it's warm. And even though you can't feel it, you can see the warmth radiating from a tree if you wear infrared glasses that make it visible. So planets, stars, living things, including you and me, are able to exist because they transform energy gradients from a state of higher to lower potential through the use of that energy to maintain their internal order. I call this the solar purpose. It's the basic thing we're all here to do and do as efficiently as possible. And we're granted existence here on Earth in exchange for optimizing the transformation of solar energy to infrared heat as it cycles through the planetary system. You can think of this solar purpose as a prime directive of sorts, and our health is the direct result of how well we perform this task. So understanding how it works is rather important for any person or profession that needs a valid set of principles to evaluate options when choosing how to live and act. So what's the breakdown on how solar energy is used here on Earth? The answer is really surprising, and it showcases just how unusual life and planet Earth really are. First of all, only 51% of energy arriving at the planet even makes it into the biosphere. The rest is reflected back or scattered by the atmosphere back into the solar system. Of that 51% that gets in, half goes towards driving ocean currents and winds. The other half goes towards evaporating water that falls back down as rain. Only 0.1% goes into providing metabolic energy for living things. So why does life need to exist at all if its metabolism barely makes a dent in the amount of energy transformed here on Earth? This is where it gets really peculiar. Without life on planet Earth, the amount of water here would gradually decrease to nothing. Somehow, life and water are dependent upon each other in order to exist here. Free hydrogen atoms, being extremely light, can escape Earth's gravity and drift off into space on the solar wind. This loss of hydrogen would result in the gradual depletion of water were there not a mechanism in place to keep those hydrogens here. And what life does is it sequesters oxygen from carbon dioxide, which allows it to bind with free hydrogen as water. Also, oxygen released by life generates ozone, which prevents water vapor and methane gas from having their hydrogens pulled away by ultraviolet light coming from the sun. Life is also able to maintain the temperature range required for water to exist, even though the amount of solar energy that the Earth receives has increased by 25% since the beginning of life, which hints that the evolution of life is actually a thermodynamically driven process, and that order emerges on multiple levels simultaneously. Most visible and ultraviolet light from the sun isn't absorbed by pure water, but those visible wavelengths are absorbed by organic life. Chlorophyll absorbs light best at wavelengths between 400 and 700 nanometers. But phytoplankton absorb light best at wavelengths of 310 to 400 nanometers, which is a much higher energy wavelength. So a smaller wavelength means a higher frequency, which means higher energy. And this higher energy light was more present early in our planet's history when life was much more primitive and marine-based. So it makes sense that those early life forms would interact best with a higher energy wavelength of light. What this means is that life is successive. It evolves to higher and higher levels of complexity to better do this job of transforming solar energy. Planet Earth first developed ocean-based life, then simple land-based life, then graduated to amazingly complex and rich ecosystems like the Amazon rainforest or the Arctic boreal forest. As one life form or ecosystem succeeds another, life forms optimize for the efficiency of energetic transformation for the planet as a whole, not for the energetic efficiency of the individual species. There are two processes whereby the complexity of ecosystems successively evolves. The first is called primary succession, and this is the gradual maturation of an ecosystem where it begins as simple and energy impoverished and goes to one that's complex and energy rich. The other is an ecological healing process called secondary succession, where a once strong and healthy ecosystem was damaged, and it needs to go through a step-by-step recovery process that looks very similar to primary succession, but hopefully occurs at a faster rate. Both of these processes require energy and time. What's the ultimate end goal of succession, and why do ecosystems need to mature and evolve anyway? Now, to find the answer to those questions, you've got to follow the energy. 90% of the energy that a plant uses goes towards evapotranspiration. It's just the process of moving water up the roots, out the leaves, and into the atmosphere. And only 3% of that water that moves through the plants is actually needed for photosynthesis, which is how the plant gets its food. So most plants can grow completely normal in laboratory-induced 100% humidity conditions where the effective evapotranspiration rate is 0. To quote Carol McCallion, the scientist I learned about this from, transpiration is in fact extremely free energy intensive, and, according to Darwinian theory, such a process, with little direct utility to the plant, should have been eliminated or suppressed through natural selection. And of course there are some plants that have evolved strategies to use less water for transpiration, and they do this by altering how they perform photosynthesis. There's CAM photosynthesis, which developed 32 million years ago. This happens in succulent-type plants like agave that only respire at night, and they exist mostly in deserts. And then there's C4 photosynthesis, which developed 9 million years ago. These are mostly grasses like corn that alter their respiration to conserve water, which makes them able to grow in drier climates. Now, both CAM and C4 photosynthesis expanded the range of habitats where plants can grow, rather than developed for the purpose of increasing their growth efficiency in a well-hydrated environment. But 95% of all the plants on Earth use the standard process. So why do 95% of plant species waste 90% of their energy on a biological process they don't need to survive? Second, why did plants that don't transpire as much water evolve? Here's another quote from McCallion. All irreversible processes, including living systems, arise and persist to produce entropy. This is not incidental, but rather a fundamental principle of nature. Excessive transpiration has not been eliminated from plants, despite the extraordinary free energy costs, precisely because the basic thermodynamic function of a plant is to increase the global entropy production of the Earth, and this is achieved by dissipating high-energy photons in the presence of water and thereby augmenting the global water cycle. So the answer for the reason plants use so much energy for evapotranspiration is effectively the solar purpose. Lots of evapotranspiration contributes to the overall increase in the entropy of the planetary system, which creates a stable environment for these plants to grow and spread over larger timescales. In order for plants to spread, they need to be able to adapt to different environments, which answers the second question. Plants evolve methods of photosynthesis that use less water in order to spread life into harsh and arid climates. This is why succulents and grasses are found in drier areas. They are the species best adapted to transforming solar energy in those surroundings. This is the end goal of succession, to generate stable, complex, diverse, and energy-rich living systems across the globe that maximize solar energy transformation. It's that simple. In order to succeed, one must first adapt optimally to their surroundings. So knowledge of the basic principles of adaptation is just as important for our purposes as knowing the basic principles of energy flows. There's a universal 3 to 4 step process for adaptation. The variation in number comes from how you describe the steps. Air Force Colonel John Boyd developed a 4-step process for fighter pilots called the ODA loop. ODA stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, Act. Before learning of Boyd's process, I developed a 3-step process called the Transformation Delta. The 3 steps are perception, interpretation, adaptation. Both processes are essentially the same. The organism gathers information about itself and the environment, interprets that information relative to individual goals, values, and most importantly resources, then develops the best course of action to achieve the optimum outcome, and then acts to make that happen. The more accurate the perception and interpretation, the greater likelihood of the adaptive action's success. Even plants utilize this process to adapt to their environment. They don't have neurons, but they do have a structural network of electrically active cells capable of receiving and transmitting information. Recent research has shown that they can even respond differently to red, blue, and white light. So in a sense, plants can even see color if you were to anthropomorphize that process. Plants perceive and interpret information and make adaptive responses to it. They grow towards light. They change their chemical composition for self-defense. They have to decide how much energy to put into growth and how much to store away for needs later. For example, a tree that loses its leaves and goes dormant in the winter needs to decide how much energy to store for breaking that dormancy in spring and how much to put towards growth. It's a balancing act. Too much energy into growth and it may not survive the season come spring. Too little growth and it won't harvest the maximum amount of energy it's capable of, which also means that it has less to store. Always refer back to the solar purpose. Life exists to transform the solar energy into chaotic infrared radiation to the greatest degree possible, and it will orient its activities and evolution to optimize for that. This means that life is also constantly orienting to cycles of energy availability. Earth has daily and annual cycles of changing energy, and these energy cycles are what determine our activity levels and how we focus our use of energy we have stored up. Humans focused their nerve systems to deal with the events surrounding two basic information flows, interoceptive and exteroceptive. Let's break those terms down into something really simple. Interoceptive information is information from inside the body. It's the internal state of affairs, things like digestion, heart rate, blood pressure, hormone levels, muscle tension, wakefulness or sleepiness, oxygen saturation throughout the body. It's a tremendous amount of data. Exteroceptive information is information about the outside external world, all of it. Is it safe? What color is that tree? Is that a grilled cheese food truck I'm walking past? It's also a tremendous amount of information to process. And we're constantly monitoring both, discarding unnecessary data points based on past experiences and choosing which warrants the primary focus in the moment and which direction we should be mobilizing stored energy towards. When we mobilize stored energy towards the outside world, we're making a speculative investment. We're depleting our internal stores in the hope that we're able to make a future positive gain in return, or to ensure that we survive a dangerous situation that would have cost us that energy anyway. When we mobilize energy internally, we're directing it towards our own healing, our growth, our repair. We're using it to restore and enhance our internal order. Optimally, we match the direction of our energy use to the daily and annual solar energy cycles. We work hard in spring and summer to store up energy for winter when less is available. That's how we match the annual cycle. We should also be active during the day and resting at night to match the daily solar cycle. This basic approach of internal-external focus and energy allocation in alignment with cyclical natural rhythms is how all plant and animal life maintains itself. Bear in mind that the most adaptive decisions aren't identical for all members of the same species. One key feature of the transformational triad is that the middle step, interpretation, depends upon the degree of resources present in the level of external challenge or demand. Depending upon the individual organism's internal energy reserves or resourcefulness, it may interpret the environment very different from another organism of the same species. Since people often understand things best when they're related to situations that they might actually experience, it's kind of like the way two different homeowners might have experienced the housing market collapse in 2008. One homeowner has 2 years of earnings in the bank, they've paid their mortgage down significantly, they have a stable career that's basically guaranteed not to change, plus they've got a few additional sources of cash flow that are still doing okay even with the downturn. And another homeowner just lost their job due to company bankruptcy. They have a few months of earnings in the bank, but they also owe a significant amount of money on their mortgage and have 2 car payments. One of these homeowners is going to see a 30% drop in the market as the absolute best investment opportunity of their lives, and they're going to end up massively increasing their wealth as a result. The other might end up bankrupt, potentially losing their home and pushing back retirement, maybe never even being able to retire at all. For an animal like a wolf, this might look like a long, unsuccessful chase that leaves them further depleted of energy when they're already hungry. This wolf may not be able to survive unless it comes across a severely weakened prey animal or another animal's leftovers. Another well-fed wolf might happen across this exact same deer a few minutes later, and since the deer's already tired, the second wolf barely has to expend any energy at all to catch a quick meal. But why do animals even need to exist at all if plants do the vast majority of the solar energy transformation here on Earth? We're going to go to another quote by Marchenko. Because of their intricate root system, which allows the plants to draw up water for evaporation from great depths, plants are not mobile and depend on insects and other animals for their supply of nutrients, cross-fertilization and seed dissemination, and dispersal into new environments. The mobility and the short lifespan of insects and animals mean that, through excrement and eventual death, they provide a reliable mechanism for dispersal of nutrients and seeds. Animals like to think that we run the show, but we're really subservient to plants in almost every fashion to get what we want. We need to do something in the service of a plant to meet these basic 4 needs that Michael Pollan talked about in his book, The Botany of Desire. He described us as caretakers of plants that provide the needs for sweet, stability, beauty, and intoxication. If you want sweet things, we have to take care of plants that make sweet or sugar. We have to farm sugar cane, grow fruits or starchy roots, or care for sugar maple forests. Growing staple crops like corn, soy, potatoes, sorghum, barley, oats, and rye provide us with a year-round store of calories that can last many seasons if they're stored properly, ensuring we don't go hungry, that we have a stable food supply. Many flowers and other types of ornamental plants wouldn't have spread across the world without humans to help. We increase their genetic diversity and help them with reproduction, all so that we can see and smell the world as a pleasant place. Cannabis sativa would not have found its way across the globe if humans didn't carry its seed everywhere. Apples wouldn't have likely spread around the globe either if they didn't make such a nice, sweet, intoxicating cider. Even when animals fill these needs, they're filled secondary to the availability of plants to feed those animals. There are no cows or sheep in the city. If we want sheep and cows, you need fields of grass, which means making sure that there is always grass. So we dedicate millions of acres of land to growing hay to make sure we have a stable supply of cows for meat and milk. Animals help to enhance the abundance and diversity of plant life and the number of energy cycles and food webs present in an ecosystem. This ensures that the maximum amount of chaos, known scientifically as entropy, is produced within those systems. The animals kick it up a notch by assisting the plants that do the majority of the energetic work. What plants don't do very well at all is move. Movement is a primary feature that makes animals different from plants. Plants have internal and external communication systems, energy processing and elimination systems, immune systems, respiratory systems. We know that they can perceive different colors of light and process chemical information, which humans do by seeing and smelling. They even have similar metabolic rates to animals when you scale for mass. But they don't have to move from place to place, and they don't have to do any of this fast. Movement of a multi-system organism requires something to control and coordinate that movement. In general, that movement's governed by a central nerve system. There are a few examples of animals without brains, but those animals either do not move, or are missing several organ systems that animals commonly possess, a cardiovascular or digestive system, for example. And amongst the moving animals without a central nerve system, a significant portion have a rudimentary nerve system. It's just lacking a central coordinating and controlling center. As animals become more complex in order to execute higher-level tasks in service of their ecosystems, they require more information processing capacity to maintain their internal order. For animals with spines, the most common arrangement is a nerve system split into two major divisions: a system that directs energy internally and a system that directs energy externally. The internally oriented division is the parasympathetic nerve system. The externally oriented division is the sympathetic nerve system. And in mammals, the parasympathetic nerve system is split into two further divisions, one that governs social interactions and one that governs the freeze or withdrawal response. Reptiles only have the division that governs the freeze response. In humans, these divisions interact with our prefrontal cortex, the conscious part of our mind, and we process the things we learn about the world through them, though these divisions are not under conscious control during times of stress. Each of these different nerve system divisions creates a different perceptual lens to see the world from, depending upon whether our internal resource state allows us to see our environment as safe or potentially dangerous. You can read more about how these divisions of the nerve system work in the book The Polyvagal Theory by Stephen Porges. It's too much to explain here, and it's a fascinating story that has explained so many of the observations I've made in my 10 years as a practicing chiropractor. Ultimately, the key to making the most adaptive decisions is being able to switch between these perceptual lenses as quickly as possible. This helps us to best match our energetic output to the environment we're in. Often organisms fail at adapting or adapt poorly. It's possible for an organism to default to operating from a limited set of lenses and adapt poorly to its environment and fail to thrive as a result. This can happen to varying degrees, and it's actually really common, but I'll cover more on that later. First, I want to discuss how our movement and posture changes depending upon how we're energetically oriented. Take a look at the elephant in this picture. It's not the least bit concerned about the antelope fight. It's probably relaxing and digesting its morning meal, and it's only watching these guys fight because there's nothing else happening. Its energy is primarily directed internally. The antelopes, on the other hand, they're not okay right now. They're fighting over territory, food, a mate, or something else that's essential for them to survive and reproduce. If they did just eat breakfast, it's fermenting in their stomach, not being actively digested. Their blood pressure's up. They're releasing hormones that break down muscle and bone and other connective tissue. they're directing energy externally. What impact is this external orientation having on their movement and posture? Look at the antelope on the right. Does his posture look relaxed to you? Can you see how his head's tucked down and forward? His neck muscles are taut like knotted ropes. His pelvis is tucked down for a solid hold on the earth while he delivers a headbutt to his opponent. Our movement strategies change depending upon which perceptual lens we're operating and adapting from. Let's look at our muscles from the perspective of what general tasks they perform and how they function in relationship to the activations of the divisions of the central nerve system. It turns out there's two major groups of muscles that have different tasks. They're activated differently, and they work in a sort of oppositional harmony where the tension in one set of muscles works against the tension of the other in order to hold us upright, to control our movement, and provide power to our movement. In some of my favorite research articles listed in the description below, along with all the others that I've used to compile the info for this video, Josephine Key, a physiotherapist, describes these two groups as the systemic local muscle system and the systemic global muscle system. The global system is comprised of the large superficial muscles of the body, like the quads, the hamstrings, the pecs, the upper shoulder muscles. These muscles drive strong, powerful movements of the body, and they're activated easily in times of stress by the fight and flight system. They provide lots of power, but very little control. They're prone to being overly active at times when our energetic focus is external. The local system is comprised of the deep muscles that stabilize and guide the movement of single joints. The deep muscles of the spine, the rotator cuff muscles, the glutes, the intrinsic muscles of the feet and jaw. These are the types of muscles that make up the control group. They set up our posture and guide our movement in a smooth, controlled fashion, making it efficient, safe, and providing a solid base for the global group to deliver power through. They're also easily inhibited from a neurological perspective. They're prone to decreased tone, decreased neural activation when we're fatigued or stressed. They're activated strongest when our energetic orientation is internal. Because humans learn based upon prior experiences, the more often we're stressed or fatigued, the more often we have an external energetic focus that shifts our muscle system activity towards the global group that provides lots of poorly coordinated and controlled power. As this becomes our new normal, our whole system slowly changes over time to get better at adapting to stressful and tiring environments, which makes it more challenging for us to slow down and enter an internally oriented energetic state and activate the local control system. Let's talk about how this relates to chiropractic. Have you ever wondered how it is that fighters are able to take so much damage and abuse while they're in the ring, but you stub your toe in the middle of the night and it practically cripples you for like 5 minutes? I believe the reason is that fight-or-flight situations shift not only your energy allocation outwards, but your information processing focus on the outside as well. So the fighter's nerve system's focused on whatever it has to in order for him to win the fight, because that's a potential survival situation, which means ignoring the repairable damage that it sees as unavoidable in the moment to achieve that goal. So maybe the stub toe in the middle of the night hurts more than getting punched in the ring, because it happens when you're focused internally, when you're working on repairing and healing yourself, when you're calm in the evening. I can't say for sure, but it makes a lot of sense to me. I also believe that this external perceptual focus at the expense of internal monitoring during stressful conditions or during states of fatigue or low resourcefulness is likely the cause of the chiropractic subluxation. Chiropractic subluxation is a really challenging term. There's no universally agreed upon definition for what it is. Most of the definitions that exist for it are a collection of the physical features that define its existence, often in a rather narrow framework that's resulted in what I call the hyphenated subluxation phenomenon, which basically is that there's all different kinds of theories for how it happens, why it happens, what it looks like, how you correct it. Tremendous number of them, lots of variation. I can't really cover them all here. But for myself, I would define subluxation as a dysfunctional or maladaptive state in the central nerve system that can be shifted closer to optimal by working with the spine. In other words, the bones don't subluxate, it's a condition of the central nerve system, and the access point for influencing that state is the spine, due to the overwhelmingly integrated nature of the spine with the rest of the central nerve system. I'm not personally attached to any one particular subluxation theory, and I suspect that most of them are valid models in their own context, and I hope that one day there's going to be an umbrella definition for subluxation, that's based upon the negative physiological impacts these different types of spinal dysfunction that chiropractors work with have on the body. I've proposed my own thermodynamic subluxation theory and written a book on it that's available on Amazon under the title The Thermodynamic Subluxation. I won't go in depth on that book here because it's readily available on Amazon, but in brief, it's an ecologically congruent model that describes how information processing errors contribute to poor adaptive responses and a gradual decrease in resilience of the human organism as a result of spinal dysfunction. What I did not cover in that book is how the subluxation occurs or the physical impacts that it has on the body. I have written a fair degree on this in my other larger book, Operating System Nature, The Birth of the Tradition, but I'm going to introduce some new material here and probably write more on it in the future. If you recall from the discussion on the previous slide, when we're stressed or fatigued, the global power muscle system becomes dominant and the activity of the local control systems diminished, resulting in decreased control of the joints. This is occurring because there's a reduced focus on proprioceptive input from the body itself, in order to enhance processing of information from the external environment. Said another way, the body is less self-aware. The effects of this reduced self-awareness are dysfunctional postural and movement patterns that can transform into structural problems over time. There are a set of features that can be expected when our dominant focus is outside. I'm going to borrow these from Josephine Key, the physiotherapist whose writings I learned about them from. And for the sake of brevity, this is a partial list. It gets pretty exhaustive and there's a lot written on this. So there's difficulty holding yourself up with ease because the postural muscle tone is reduced. You have to rely on more primitive movement strategies to maintain upright posture, which is very energy draining, and the worse the problem is, the more fatigued or crude the posture will become. You have defective pelvic control. The muscles controlling the pelvis shift the pelvis forward or backward in both rotation and translation. I commonly see patients with either forward translation and backward rotation, or backward translation and forward rotation. This changes the curvatures of the lumbar spine away from optimal, amongst many other things. Movement initiation from the control muscles of the spine, the hips and the shoulders, is reduced. Instead of using muscles that are able to generate a stable base for smooth, controlled movement, more powerful, crudely controlled muscles initiate movements, placing additional stress on the structures of the body and increasing injury risk while simultaneously decreasing performance. Poor proprioception and spatial awareness. Because the focus is outside the body, the person's less able to match up self to environment, so their movements become more clumsy and awkward in ways that they're not even aware of. There's a tendency towards primitive movement patterns. Movements in the arms begin to favor flexion strategies, and movements of the lower limb begin to favor extension strategies, which is similar to the neural pattern associated with cerebral palsy, though far more extreme in that condition. Rotating the body and shifting its weight becomes less controlled. This challenges balance, particularly when the arms or legs are also included in attempts to rotate and shift weight. Think about doing a round-off or a cartwheel and how easy they are as a child, but I always surprise adults by how hard they are when they try one again for the first time in 20 years. It's important to bear in mind that most people have no idea how dysfunctional they actually are because we tend to limit our activities to those that don't push them, which then decrease so slowly over time that we don't even notice that our limits are shrinking. You're going to end up with dysfunctional breathing patterns, and the impacts of breathing dysfunction alone could be the focus of an entire career. There's a tremendous amount of information related to dysfunctional breathing patterns. There's going to be the thoracic dysfunction. The mid-back and the chest become stiff, predisposing the shoulders and arms to pain syndromes and injury, amongst other things. And there's going to be predictable changes to the spine itself. And this is where the chronic, externally oriented nerve system results in the physical manifestations of subluxation. There's changes in the spinal curvature that start out as a functional change, then transform the physical spinal structure over time. There's a loss of extension within portions of the spine, especially in the mid-back. There are areas of the spine that become stiff, and compensatory areas that become hypermobile. The stiff areas are most commonly the craniocervical junction, which is occiput, C1, C2, C3, the cervicothoracic region, which is C7, T1, T2, and first and second ribs, the apex of the thoracic curvature, which is T5, 6, 7, and 8, the thoracolumbar junction, which is T10, 11, and 12, the lumbosacral junction, which is L5 and sacrum, followed by the sacroiliac joints, And then the hypermobile regions are often the mid-cervical segments and the lumbar region. So the upper neck, the area where the lower neck and the upper back meet, the mid-back, the area where the mid and low back meet, and practically any joint in the low back and pelvis. So if you count these areas of decreased mobility, you'll find that there are 7 of them if you count the left and the right sacroiliac joints separately. If you're a chiropractor, you may also recognize these segments as the regions that are commonly adjusted by chiropractors. In my personal experience as a patient and visiting many, but not all the offices, I see that a large numbers of people will often adjust each of these 7 regions almost on the fly as they go between patients. In chiropractic college, we call this practice approach the flying 7, and it wasn't a favorable term. The school I attended taught a much more specific method of spinal analysis and a more conservative adjusting protocol. Yet many of my classmates ended up adopting the flying 7 method of practice after graduating, just as a majority of chiropractors had before. I'm not going to go after the flying 7 too hard, even though I believe that a more in-depth analysis and specific adjustment is far superior, because the facts are that the flying 7 still results in a decent quality outcome the majority of the time, and some patients and some doctors actually prefer it. I'm only discussing it in a presentation on chiropractic ecology because its crude effectiveness illustrates a more subtle observation. The reason it's getting results is likely because the spinal regions mobilized during a flying 7 session are the same regions where the externally focused nerve system has stopped paying attention to the incoming information about the position, movement, momentum, and tone of the spinal segment it's comprised of. The flying 7 breaks a central state of external focus essentially by yelling to the brain, "Hey, we're here, there's a problem, pay attention." And the brain does, for a little while. But the longevity of results for this kind of care are often lacking. A complaint many chiropractic patients have is that the results of this kind of care only last for a week or two, which may also be the source for the false rumor that once you start coming to the chiropractor, you need to keep coming for life. For some people, the flying 7 is a great option for care. In my experience, these people are the kind of people who are, in general, low stress, had happy and stable childhoods, they moderately exercise, don't drink too much, they live relatively simple lives that they're satisfied with. These people have a spine that functions well most of the time, but they get into a tight spot that causes a problem and they seek care right away. After a session, they feel refreshed and they go off to continue living a happy, healthy life until the next time they end up in a tight spot for some unforeseen reason. What I've just described is someone whose nerve system has a very balanced level of what I call tone. They're able to rapidly shift between different nerve system perspectives, and they spend most of their time with an internal energetic orientation because their lives aren't overly demanding. We don't know any stats about what percentage of the population these people may make up, but we do know that approximately 30% of children never develop a fully balanced and functional musculoskeletal system. The most common reason that 30% doesn't develop balanced movement and posture is a difficult childbirth, which results in injury to the upper cervical spine. And remember, the imbalance in the musculature is coming from an imbalance in the central nerve system, and there's lots of different ways someone can express a perceptual rut. Josephine Key states, "We've noticed in our spinal pain population a tendency for 2 main forms of basic muscle tonus. Those who have lower tone and are looser with more of a tendency to anti-gravity collapse, and those whose tone is more hyperactive with general tightness, tension, and stiffness. This could be an expression of subtle primary CNS dysfunction." And this matches my personal experience in chiropractic practice perfectly. As a tonal practitioner, I'm always assessing the people I work with to see which lens is dominant. Can the person easily transition between lenses? Are they stuck in one really bad or just a little? And are they okay right now? What adaptive strategy does their body default to when they're stressed out or fatigued? The people with a hyperactive fight or flight system have a characteristic level of tone, commonly accompanied with a particular posture and a set of muscle pattern imbalances. The people with an overactive withdrawal or dissociative nervous system, the one we inherited from the reptiles, have a much lower level of tone and a completely different tendency for posture and muscle imbalance. My goal as a tonal chiropractor is to restore the individual to an optimal level of tone by helping direct their energetic focus back on restoring internal harmony and order. I'll be covering more on how they do this at a later date, but for now, I want to go back in history and answer another big question. Why do we even need chiropractors in the first place instead of simply evolving to be more resilient and self-correcting beings? If the primary cause of the subluxation is a reduced level of internal self-awareness that leads to an unmanageable level of internal chaos, then it would logically follow that the restoration or enhancement of internal self-awareness would reduce or prevent subluxation. In his paper on the thermodynamic functions of the autonomic nerve system, Giorgio Recordati made some remarks about the work of a particular neuroethologist. And if you've never heard the word neuroethologist before, it's simply the evolutionary and comparative approach to the study of animal behavior and its underlying mechanistic control by the nerve system. What Recordati and this other fellow described was a relationship between the social grooming behaviors of primates and the restoration of an internally oriented, energetic focus that brings the internal system back into harmony. They describe social grooming as a behavior directed towards the outer surface of the body which redirects the focus of the nerve system internally. If you're wondering what social grooming looks like in primates, think about monkeys sitting around picking bugs, dirt, and dead skin or tangled hair off each other. In humans, it's a little less obvious, but it still serves the same basic function, to maintain the hygiene and the appearance of the people that you care about. As human knowledge and social structures evolved, the simple act of social grooming is thought to have evolved into the various practices of the healing arts. This is true for all forms of healing and medicine, not just chiropractic or massage. Another thing to consider is that the human ability to advance the effectiveness of our healing arts may have contributed to the evolution of our intellect and complexity. When there are other humans present who are willing and able to patch us up after a mishap, we may have been able to devote more energy towards the development and maintenance of consciousness by accepting a certain amount of increased physical risk. The more energy and information processing capacity that are demanded by the conscious mind, the less is available to maintain internal physical order in the presence of a strong external demand. It's pure speculation on my part, but it may be that one of the reasons humans have evolved conscious awareness and processing to the degree that we have it is that we knew as a species there would be other humans around to help us when we got into a tight spot, which meant experimentation and failing forward were much safer for us as a species. I believe the chiropractic adjustment is social grooming taken to the level of fine art. If my hunch is right about advanced social grooming, freeing up information processing capacity and directing it internally in a way that allows us to advance the structures of our society, to develop the fine arts, music, written language, and so on, then it stands to reason that any social grooming process that works at a level as advanced as chiropractic would be making further gains in our ability as a species. Beyond social and conscious evolution, which is admittedly speculation on my part, though there are societies who have used spinal therapies this way in the past, what makes this concept of the adjustment as a social grooming behavior specifically relevant to subluxation correction is that it may be able to help us explain why two completely different types of chiropractic care are able to get profound results. High-velocity, low-amplitude chiropractic adjustments, the kind that result in the popping noise that most people associate with the adjustment, stimulate an increase in proprioceptive input from the spine into the central nerve system, changing the activity of the muscles around the joint and the activity within the brain itself. Tonal or low-force neurologically based chiropractic adjustments use light contacts on the skin over specific neurologically sensitive points in order to initiate the self-regulating and correcting strategies of the body. They also change the activity of the brain and the spinal musculature. While the two methods look extremely different, the basic intent of each is the same: to restore the individual to an internally focused energetic state so that they can restore or enhance their internal order, which results in improved health and healing for them. This could be the reason the body has not evolved the mechanism to self-correct subluxations on its own, and that attempting to adjust oneself is so ineffective when compared with an adjustment from a skilled chiropractor. Humans are social apes. The nerve system evolved expecting there to be other humans around willing to exchange care with each other. This also explains why people truly do benefit the most from chiropractic care when they receive it regularly. The adjustment is training flexibility into the nerve system, and the nerve system requires repetition to learn anything. How much repetition does it need? That depends on how deep the neurological rut someone is in, and how much their physical structure has changed in order to accommodate that rut. Also recall that the nerve system interprets environments as safe or dangerous depending upon your state of resourcefulness. Simply being in the presence of a trained chiropractor who knows more about your spine and how to care for it, and who also cares about you, increases your level of available resources. It's easier for your nerve system to transition its focus internally when someone else has literally got your back. All of this paints a picture of the chiropractic adjustment playing a powerful role in shifting the energetic orientation of the individual into a more adaptive state that allows them to better fulfill their role in the ecological niche. You interact with the energy flows on planet Earth in order to survive, but you must also fulfill your role as a hyperkeystone species in service to the ecosystems that you're a part of in order to thrive, and for humans to thrive as a species. All animals on planet Earth occupy an ecological niche, and if they do not fulfill the role that that niche places upon them, then they fail as individuals or as a species. And if conditions change and they don't adapt, then they fail in that situation also. Humans play a unique role in the world's ecosystems. We're the only animal that consciously plans out the future and modifies the environment in any truly significant way to suit our needs. Our niche is to use our intellect to make our surroundings more abundant as measured by the standards of ecological well-being. A healthy ecosystem has a set of characteristics that can be quantified to measure its health. And abundance and diversity of species and food webs are some of those characteristics. It's even possible to measure the health of an ecosystem by measuring the amount of heat energy leaking from it compared to a similar healthy ecosystem, much like the use of thermography in the chiropractic practice to measure the health of the human energy or the nerve system. It's a cooperative dance, and in how we see the world changes the way we choose to modify it. And when a culture is made up of many individuals, with the vast majority of them operating from the perspective of fight, flight, or withdraw, dissociate, it makes adaptive choices in a defensive or an offensive manner and not a cooperative manner. And cultures have momentum. It's much easier to do things the way that they've always been than to make a change. But as I look at the health statistics for young people, the autism rates, the suicide rates, the number of children that are developing chronic illnesses that used to be reserved for older adults, I can see that it's time to shift gears. If B.J. Palmer, the developer of chiropractic, were here today, I believe he would say the role of a chiropractor is to restore human health through focusing on aligning the energetic flows of each individual, community, and ecosystem towards a state of growth and evolution. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you learned something new from it. If you haven't already, please take a moment and click subscribe on my channel and share this video in your social media accounts to get the word out. I believe that a societal shift to an ecological focus is the only thing that will get the health of humans and the planet back on the right track. And that won't happen if there's no awareness of how human health depends upon living congruently with the principles of nature's operating system. Check out the description for a list of the sources and resources for this video, as well as links to my books on Amazon, Operating System Nature, The Birth of the Tradition, and The Thermodynamic Subluxation, the intersection of chiropractic and ecology, which cover these topics in greater depth. I can also be reached at foxpeter@gmail.com.